Some movies have a catchy, unorthodox title. They want to rope you in with a few words that not only grabs your attention, but lets you know what kind of movie this'll be. It's not easy to do, but everyone from the smallest indie to the biggest studio will do this. Something ridiculous like Killed the Family and Went to the Movies, or A Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell, or Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death. These titles get your attention. Is that 30 seconds yet? I'm just stalling here because YouTube insists on you not saying any major swears in the first 30 seconds of a video. Okay, there we go. This movie is called Don't Fuck in the Woods 2. How's that for unorthodox? A while ago I called wind to the original movie's title and it made me laugh. I was curious, the title roped me in, and I figured I would check it out. The movie was about what I believe were alien monsters that were attacking campers. It starts with a couple who ignores the title of the movie and has sex in the woods. The monster can smell sex and catches them in the act. It then kills the campers and eats their reproductive parts. Another group of people go into the woods looking for their lost friends, and despite being concerned about their missing companions, they all have sex in the woods and are killed by the monsters. It was a very, very low-budgeted film. The movie wasn't great by any means, but it was occasionally funny, and there was enough nudity in it to keep my simple brain interested. Although, honestly, the sex scenes got a little tedious. For a movie that was only about an hour, there was so little plot, and most of the sex scenes went on for way too long. I'd say at least half of it was made up by the cast fumbling and grinding on each other. The last 15 minutes or so was outtakes from the shoot, and they were pretty funny. It showed that everyone was having a good time. Overall, it looked like a fun shoot, and I gave the filmmakers credit for putting together a fully functional film on what I understand was almost no money. I don't know the story behind it, but I'm just assuming that the first one did well enough that they were able to make a second. 2 is not only longer, but has a noticeably larger budget. Not AAA Hollywood blockbuster budget, just a low-budget movie where you can tell they had a few more bucks than the original. One of the things that lets you know that there was a budget, this time they had a location. In part 1, it was 90% people in tents. In 2, most of it took place in cabins and the locations around a campground. More than likely, they were able to get a deal on the place by filming in the off-season. Another thing of note was that they were able to shoot a decent amount during the day. In the first, it was almost entirely night shoots. So 2 starts off with some changes to the lore. Like I said a minute ago, the original established that there were these monsters that were attracted to sex. This one starts off with a monster instantly impregnating a naked lady, who then gives birth to these slug creatures. What then follows was sort of like a dirty version of Night of the Creeps. The slug monsters are attracted to the smell of copulation and jam themselves into any orifice they can find. One in particular was absolutely shocking, and I can't believe they showed it. 2 is about a group of friends who are going to work at this campground, which is right nearby the events of the last film. The friends are kind of your stereotypical cast of horror movie characters. There's the horny couple, the bitchy one, the nerd, the jock, and so on. Honestly, the bitch, Tasha, ended up surprising me. I thought she was going to be the annoying one, but she ended up being pretty cool, and had a few of the funniest lines in the film. I watched this with a group, and everyone had a good time. Yes, there was some sex in the woods, but it wasn't overdone like part 1. Well, except for maybe the couple where the guy insisted on wearing the mullet wig. Yeah, that was a thing. The parasites would, enter a host and transform them into a killer monster hybrid that went after anyone, regardless if they were having sex or not. Jane, the survivor of the first movie, arrives to tell this new group what's going on. Surprisingly, was after about the halfway point, there was only one brief nude scene, whereas in the first it was tons of nudity all the way through. It showed a bit of how they needed nudity to establish the somewhat silly story, but then once they got past that, they were able to focus on the actual plot. It's one of the things I enjoyed about the movie. They knew when to move on. They gave the audience what the title promised, but then delivered an actual horror movie. Another thing that made this one better was that since the sex scenes were much shorter than the first, it makes this one easier to watch with a group. The first one felt kinda pornish at times, which is funny at first, but gets awkward after several minutes of on-screen fake grinding. The scenes in this felt more on par with the 80s horror sex scenes. They got in, they showed some female and even male nudity, and they got out. They didn't linger on it like you were watching The Erotic Traveler. The film ended with a post-credits stinger that established there will indeed be a part 3. Hey, we live in a world with 6 Sharknadoes. I think it's fine if there's 3 of these. The movie also ended with outtakes, but not nearly as many as the original. Let me temper your expectations. This is not a great movie. However, if you're watching it with a group of friends who likes bad movies, you are in for a good time. It's the right amount of stupid, and honestly, I was entertained way more than I was expecting. This series is kind of a labor of love from creator-director Sean Burkett. He made the first one as a ridiculous homage to the 80s horror films, and continued that here. The first movie had a lot of hateable characters, but in this, there was a better mix of good and bad. There was even some character development in there, beyond what you would expect for a movie with this blunt a title. It showed a lot of growth in the filmmaker. It was competently made, which I genuinely mean as a compliment, and not a backhanded one. I've seen tons of mini and micro-budgeted films, and so many of them have terrible technical presentations. No white balance, bad framing, and horrendous audio. This not only had none of those problems, but had some artistic flair, which surprised me. The movie still had that shot-on-digital look, but it wasn't as awful as something like Cocaine Shark, which by comparison was very disappointing. Sorry, Cocaine Shark team. I was kind of shocked at how much I enjoyed this one. After the first, I was expecting it to be more the same, but it wasn't. I mean, yes, there was sex in the woods, but there was also an effort to make it more than just sex in the woods. The effects were decent. There really was only 2 CG moments I noticed, with both of them being part of an explosion at the end. Everything else from the monster to the gallons of blood splatter was practical. That made me happy because too many of these micro-budgeted films just shoot everything and add terrible CG in post. So many of them would at least be tolerable if they just went practical. I can understand using CG to fix some things, but so many have really awful morphs or CG monsters when they clearly don't have the budget, time, or skills to be able to make them look even remotely good. Plus, unless you have the skill levels of someone from ILM, CG blood always looks fake. You're better off with some squibs and a guacamole gun, which was what Robert Rodriguez used in El Mariachi, which looked fantastic, and the whole movie cost like $7,000. Don't Fuck in the Woods 2 is, in my humble opinion, a bad movie that overcomes its badness by being highly entertaining. If you turn your nose up at the title, this is not the movie for you. On the other hand, if the title makes you laugh, and you don't mind overlooking the obvious flaws in a very low-budgeted film, you will have a good time. Especially with friends. This is not a good movie, but this is a fun movie, and sometimes that's all we really need.